Welcome back, fellow shop rats. Today we're doing a little different Talk About It Tuesday. We're going to talk about camshafts and Valvetrain. So let's just watch the show intro. We'll see you in just a few seconds. I'm Mike, and this is
My Cars Shop.
Y'all know that I've got a couple engine projects we're working on. The one we're the deepest into right now is the 413 for the Golden Mullet. And even though that project hasn't even really started yet, that one is going to require a lot of thinking and searching for parts and a lot of engineering and things like that. So I've spent a lot of time in my spare time, which I have none of, but in my spare time between things, researching what pistons I want to use in that motor and heads and camshafts and all that kind of stuff. Well, my buddy Dave happened to mention to me that he had a motor that was built by the Ram Chargers that he used to run in one of his circle track cars. And when he got that motor, there was a camshaft, a really, really radical camshaft that came with it that he chose not to use. And he had had this cam sitting on the shelf for 30 years. I don't know, a long time. And he said, hey, if you want this cam, come get it. So I did. And lo and behold, here we go. We have a set of mechanical rockers, which I need to look up and make sure they're the right ones because I don't ever want to assume. But we have a set of mechanical rockers, and we have wrapped up neatly a camshaft. This is an Iskandarian cam, and these are mechanical lifters. I'm sorry if I said rockers. I correct myself. A set of mechanical lifters for that camshaft. Brand new, never been used, but definitely really old. Now this cam, wasn't sure I wanted to use it. It's radical. I mean, really radical. So if you're familiar with cam profiles at all, this is a 310 degree duration, 630 lift on a 108 lobe center camshaft. It's a biggin. It's a biggin. Well, it's normal size, but it's still a biggin. The advertised specs on this cam say that it is for RPM 3,000 to 7,000 RPM. I think it would probably twist a lot higher than that, but I have no intention of spinning that 413 that high. Now, a couple things I want to talk about. Y'all know that I plan on going with forced induction, a 671 blower right off of a Detroit diesel that I've had for many, many years. And there's some things about these cams that two schools of thought. And one school of thought is you have to have a very specific grind camshaft to use with forced induction because blah, 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 because you lose too much out the exhaust if it's not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other school of thought, which is the one I adhere to, let me back up. I believe some of that is true if you're building a street car. When you're building more of a race car, even though this probably will be a street legal race car, the school of thought is that whatever the camshaft does, naturally aspirated, it's going to do even better with forced induction. And I tend to adhere to that school of thought based upon experience, based upon being around both turbo and supercharged applications for the last 40 years. Having been around drag racing and things like that, I've seen them naturally aspirated cams work very, very well. So I tend to adhere to the thought that, because I don't care about fuel mileage and all of that stuff. All I care about is making massive amounts of horsepower, and if it stays in the miles per gallon, I'm happy. If it starts getting gallons per mile, okay, maybe we want to look at something. But all of that to say, I decided I'm going to go ahead and use this cam. Now, I've been checking around and digging into it and finding out, because rocker arms and valve springs, and well, there's a lot of things to consider when you're using this cam. And I normally don't start with the camshaft and then build the Valvetrain, although you need to a point. But I try to look at, okay, what do I want to do with this? What's the best cam for the application? But when something like this falls in your lap, you look at it and say, can I use it? What I want to talk about today is where my headspace has been as far as determining what I need to be able to use this cam. We have the cam, we have the lifters. We need push rods. We need something other than stock adjustable rocker arms. We need different valve springs. We need probably different heads, but that's getting beyond where we're going today. So let's go over to the whiteboard and we'll talk about a few things over there. Again, I want to reiterate that the point of today's video is to just talk about it. I want to share my thought processes. This is not definitive. This is not saying this is absolutely what you must do. I'm just sharing this is what I've been thinking about as I've been looking at using that camshaft. So we have a camshaft down here, and I'm just going to draw a lobe. Against that lobe, we have a lifter. And against that lifter, we have a push rod that comes up, and then up here, we have a rocker arm, and then over here we have a valve and a spring. So this is basically your Valvetrain right here.
This right here, this is your Valvetrain.
This cam goes around, pushes this lifter up and down, which in turn causes this rocker to rock on its fulcrum over here to the valve spring. With a cam that has 0.630 inches of lift. That's over a half an inch of lift. We're approaching, 750 is 3/4, 500 is half. You want to talk about radical? If y'all have heard the cam in my GTS on all the videos I've shared, that cam is, for comparison's sake, only has 509 inches of lift. This one has, 310 degrees of duration. The one in the Dart has 292 degrees of duration. They both have 108 lobe center. So the lobe center is fine. That's the overlap basically between the intake and exhaust valve. We're not going to talk about that today. But this cam is radically bigger than the one that's in my GTS. The GTS is the largest hydraulic cam that Mopar Performance makes. You'd be getting into the mechanical world. So this is a pretty radical cam. So the concern here is stock rocker arms, stock push rods are not going to work. They're not strong enough. You can get into rocker bind up here, and where the rockers will actually bind against the valve spring and hit and cause big problems, bending valves and breaking rocker arms and stuff. The other thing that you have to be concerned about is the valve springs themselves. What is the compressed dimension when this valve is all the way open, which it is right now because we're at the top of the cam lobe. So if you don't use the proper springs, what happens is this spring no longer springs and becomes solid. Okay, so now you've got a real problem, and you're going to break stuff because the spring can't compress enough to compensate for this high lift cam, and it'll break a rocker arm or bend a push rod. If it's just a minor bind, it could wipe out the cam lobe because there's too much pressure, stuff like that. The second thing in valve springs is it has to be strong enough. Stock valve springs aren't going to handle this radical amount of high lift, and as the RPM comes up, it's not strong enough to close that valve. So we need to know what kind of seat pressure we need on that valve when it's closed to keep that valve at, say, 7,000 RPM to make sure that that valve shuts every single time and doesn't do what we call float. Now, I haven't done the math yet, but I'm thinking we probably need 700 to 800 PSI of pressure, spring pressure. That could be too high. Like I said, I've really not thought about this too much, but I'm just using that as a number right now until I sit down and do the math. But I'm thinking around 700. Some guys might say that's a little bit much, but I'd rather too much than not enough, as long as it's not too much to wipe out the cam, which the springs I have on the GTS are probably in that ballpark. They're triple springs. They're way overkill for that cam, but that's okay. The price was right. We don't want spring bind. We don't want too little seat pressure on the valve springs for this radically high lift cam. We don't want a rocker arm, like a stock one could bind in this area, whoops, so that the valve spring doesn't hit here, depending on its operation, or it could hit out here, depending on its operation, how it's designed. It could push down too much and cause bind. So just in general, the theory is when this is at its resting position, when this cam lobe is the other way, you want your angle, I believe, to be fairly perpendicular with the valve, if I remember right. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that you don't want your rocker arm to be like this when the cam lobe is all the way down. And of course, you don't want it to be like this when the cam lobe is all the way down. You want it to be fairly level so that it does this. You could be a little bit this way, but not too much. So, having the right length push rod makes a difference. Of course, these are adjustable because there's a screw right here that comes down, and the rocker arms that I have coming that I'll show you, my buddy over at Just Mopar, Joe hooked me up with a set that he had he's not using. I think they're going to be real good ones. They're Crane. I believe they're called the ductile iron ones. They're the exact same ones I have on the GTS on the small block. This is a big block set. And these use what they call a ball and cup, so that there's a ball on the stud here, and I'll show you these when we get them, and there's a cup on the push rod here that allows for better performance, basically. So these are all the things that I've been thinking about is, okay, what rocker arms am I going to need to use this cam, what push rods? So now we have the cam, we have the lifters, we have the push rods, and the rocker arms on the way. I haven't received those yet because I haven't sent them the money yet, but I will. So now I'm down to this. So let's talk about heads real quick and what I'm thinking about the heads. What I've got here is a 413 head, 516 casting, I believe it is. I haven't really looked these over at all till now, so I literally have not done any research on these. Yeah, they're a 516 casting. I think that's a fairly decent head. This motor didn't have a lot of miles on it, so these heads might be usable. I don't know. Without terrible amount of work, I got prices on going through the heads, and it's like $250 to do a valve job on it. But if it needs valves and guides and stuff like that, whew, it gets pricey real fast. So our intake valve on this head is a 208. That's a pretty good size valve. Yeah, 208. By the way, the exhaust valves in this are 160, so these heads do have the small exhaust valves, not the bigger ones. So these heads could work. I don't know how many cc chamber this is. It's got a pretty good size chamber. The pistons in this, I believe, well, from what the research I did on the stock motor, it was a 10 to 1 motor compression, and it made like 360 horse. So this was no slouch for 1964. So this is one option for sure, is to just use these cast heads. I probably will do that unless I need to sink over $1,000 a head into it to replace valves and guides and all of that stuff. But if we just need to do a basic valve job, I am looking to pick up a valve machine and the tools for grinding seats. I'm not looking to spend much money, but if you know somebody that has an old set kicking around in their garage they want to let go of, I'd love to be able to do my own head work here. And again, I'm not looking to spend much money. It's just a thought that I had. Hey, if there's an old machine kicking around somewhere that could be had pretty cheap, doesn't have to be top of the line for what I do, that'd be awesome. So just a thought. Anyway, if I'm going to be sinking more than $1,000 a head into these, I'm just going to go ahead and probably go with aluminum heads on this. But I'd rather not. I'd really rather use these heads if I can. But in determining the pistons, I was on the phone with Summit Racing, and it looks like Wiseco is about the only one that I can find so far that makes a 4.25 inch bore forged piston. Now remember, the 413 is about a 4.18, let's say. So we need to bore it like 0.062, basically 60 thousandths, to put a 426 piston in this motor. So we've got to get the block sonic checked to make sure it can handle being bored and all of that stuff. But the pistons that I found so far, which are $1,000 plus the rings is another 300.
Cough, cough.
For that 4.25 inch forged piston, it's a 10 to 1 piston. But that obviously depends upon head gasket thickness, whether the deck has been, the block has been decked, if the heads have been milled, stuff like that. But it's dependent upon the CCs of this. So at some point, I would like to take you guys through the process of CCing a head to show you how it's done. It's been a long time since I've done one, but it's a real simple process. It doesn't require anything real high tech, and we can just get a quick and easy cc measurement on these heads. These are pretty big chambers. I'm guessing from the looks of this is probably a 70 something cc chamber. These are the things that I've been thinking about, and just kind of the mental gyrations I go through when I'm starting to put together a motor. The point of today's video is just to talk over where my head is right now. None of this is a definitive conclusion. This is just what I've been thinking about, and I thought it'd be fun to just talk with you about it. We know we got a good forged crank. We're going to get that checked, crack checked, and make sure it's good. I got all the prices on all the machine work for the block, getting the block clean. The only thing my local machine shop doesn't do is sonic testing. So I'm hoping to find some place nearby here in mid-Michigan that can do that relatively inexpensively. And we can double check the cylinder walls in that block when we're ready to move forward. But again, the point of this video is just to share what I'm thinking. Another thing I haven't found yet is what rods to use. I need to look at the rods that I have and determine if they're strong enough. I doubt they're going to be, but they might. You never know. So I'm going to be looking for, if they're not good enough, I'll be looking for a good set of real strong rods to put in this 413, because I really want to build a stout bottom end for this motor. Thanks for sitting around the workbench with me and doing a little bench racing. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching. We're over on the Insta thing. She loves us and does the cookie thing for us and stuff like that. We're here on YouTube, obviously, because you're watching. Like, subscribe, share the video with other people. I'd love to see the channel continue to grow. The more the channel grows, the more I'm going to be able to do. The more I can do, the more the channel grows. We got a lot going on around here with all the projects, and I really appreciate you being here. Oh, I almost forgot.
Rock!
Thank you.